Jake Morrison wiped sweat from his forehead as he checked the navigation systems one more time. The small exploration ship hummed quietly around him, while stars stretched endlessly in all directions. Behind him, Lisa Chun worked at the pilot controls while Tony Rodriguez crawled under a panel, fixing something that had been making strange noises for the past hour. "How much longer until we reach the target zone?" Jake asked Lisa, without looking away from his screen. The mission was simple enough: collect samples from 3 asteroids in this remote part of space and return home. Earth scientists wanted to know more about the materials out here before they sent bigger ships. 2 hours if Tony can keep the engines running smooth, Lisa replied while adjusting their course slightly. She had been flying ships for 10 years and knew when something felt wrong. Today, everything felt wrong, but she could not explain why. Tony's voice came from under the floor panel. "The power coupling is acting up again, but I can keep it stable for now. We might need to cut the mission short if it gets worse." He slid out from under the panel and dusted off his hands. "I don't like being this far from home with equipment problems." Jake nodded and turned back to his instruments. The 3 of them had worked together before and trusted each other completely. That trust would soon be tested in ways none of them could imagine. 2 hours later, their ship shuddered violently. Warning lights flashed across every control panel, and an alarm started buzzing loudly. Lisa fought with the controls as the ship spun slowly to one side. "What happened?" Jake shouted over the noise. "Main engine just died," Tony called out as he ran toward the engine room. "I'm reading total power failure in the drive systems." Lisa managed to stop the spinning, but they were now drifting in space with no way to move forward. "Emergency power is holding, but we can't get home like this." Jake tried the communication system to call for help, but found only empty static. They were too far from any human settlement for their emergency beacon to reach anyone. He looked at his crewmates and saw the same worry in their eyes that he felt in his stomach. "How long can we survive on emergency power?" he asked. "Maybe 4 days if we're careful," Lisa answered. "Less if we keep using the communication system." Tony returned from the engine room looking grim. "The main drive is completely dead. Something burned out the primary control circuits. I can't fix it without parts we don't have." Jake stared out at the stars and tried to think of options. They had enough food and air for a week, but no way to move or call for help. He was about to suggest they shut down all non-essential systems when Lisa gasped. "There's something out there," she whispered. Jake and Tony looked where she was pointing and saw a massive shape moving among the stars. It was bigger than any ship humans had ever built, and it glowed with a soft blue light. The alien vessel approached slowly, and Jake realized it had been watching them. "Are we picking up any signals from it?" Tony asked. Lisa checked her instruments. "Nothing on any frequency we use." "But Jake, look at this." She pointed to a screen showing energy readings. "That ship is scanning us with some kind of beam." The alien vessel moved closer until it filled most of their view screen. Jake could see strange symbols glowing along its hull, and what looked like weapon systems pointed in their direction. Then a new kind of light surrounded their ship. "We're caught in some sort of tractor beam," Lisa said as she tried the controls. "I can't break free." Jake watched helplessly as their small ship was pulled toward an opening in the alien vessel's hull. The opening was large enough to hold a dozen ships their size. As they passed through some kind of energy barrier, Jake felt his ears pop from a pressure change. Their ship settled onto a metal floor inside what appeared to be a hangar bay. Through the view screen, Jake could see other strange machines and equipment he did not recognize. Movement in the shadows caught his attention. 3 figures walked toward their ship, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. They stood nearly 7 feet tall with blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. Each had 4 arms and wore clothing that looked more like flexible metal than fabric. Their faces were long and narrow, with large eyes that reflected light. Like mirrors. "I think we just made first contact," Tony whispered. One of the aliens stepped forward and pointed a device at their ship. Jake felt a strange tingling sensation, and then heard a voice inside his head, speaking words he somehow understood. "You will come out of your vessel now. Do not attempt to resist, or you will be harmed." Jake looked at Lisa and Tony. They had heard the same voice. He made a decision that he hoped would keep them all alive. "We're going to cooperate," he told his crew. "But stay alert and watch for any chance to escape." The 3 humans opened their ship's hatch and stepped out to meet their captors. Not knowing that one of these aliens would soon regret the day, he decided to study human beings. Dr. Zethkar studied the 3 human specimens with the same interest he might show for unusual insects. The creatures stood barely 6 feet tall and possessed only 2 arms each, which seemed like a serious evolutionary disadvantage. Their skin was a pale pink color, and they had hair growing from the tops of their heads in different colors. Most primitive species he had studied were covered in fur or scales. "Fascinating," he said to his assistant. These mammals achieved space travel despite their obvious physical limitations. The humans were separated and placed in different holding areas. Zethkar chose the one called Jake Morrison for his primary research subject. The creature appeared to be the leader based on how the others looked to him for guidance. Leaders often provided the most interesting data about a species. Psychological makeup. Jake found himself alone in a white room with no windows and only one door. The walls felt warm to the touch and gave off a soft light that had no visible source. A platform in the center of the room seemed designed for him to lie on. He did not want to cooperate, but the alien had made it clear that resistance would bring pain to his friends. Zethkar entered the room carrying several devices that hummed with energy. His 4 arms moved independently as he arranged his equipment around the platform. When he spoke, Jake heard the words directly in his mind rather than through his ears. "You will lie on the platform so I can begin my studies. Your cooperation will determine how comfortable this process becomes for you." Jake climbed onto the platform and tried to stay calm. He had been through survival training in the military and knew that staying alert was his best chance of finding a way out of this situation. As Zethkar began his work, Jake studied everything he could see about the alien and his equipment. The first tests seemed designed to measure Jake's physical responses. Zethkar attached sensors to Jake's skin and then exposed him to different temperatures, lights, and sounds. Jake noticed that the alien seemed surprised by some of the readings he was getting. "Your pain tolerance is much higher than expected," Zethkar muttered as he made notes on a device that projected images in the air. "Most species show stress responses at much lower levels." Jake said nothing but filed away this information. If humans were tougher than this alien expected, that might be useful later. He also noticed that Zethkar's equipment made specific sounds when it was working, and different sounds when it was not. Pattern recognition had always been one of Jake's strengths. Over the next several hours, Zethkar subjected Jake to increasingly uncomfortable tests. He injected substances into Jake's bloodstream and monitored how quickly his body processed them. He exposed Jake to gravitational changes that made him feel heavy and then weightless. He played sounds at frequencies that made Jake's teeth ache. Through it all, Jake endured and observed. He noticed that Zethkar became more excited as the tests continued, as if he was discovering something unexpected. The alien's 4 hands moved faster as he worked, and his large eyes reflected more light when he was interested in a result. "Remarkable adaptation speed," Zethkar said during one test. "Your brain is forming new neural pathways in real time to compensate for sensory disruption." This should not be possible in a species at your technological level. Jake filed away another piece of information. His brain was doing something this advanced alien had not seen before. Maybe humans were not as primitive as their captor believed. During a break between tests, Jake heard faint sounds through the walls. He recognized Lisa's voice and knew she was in a room nearby. He also heard what might have been Tony working on something mechanical. His friends were alive and apparently trying to figure out their own situations. When Zethkar returned, he brought new equipment that looked more dangerous than before. I need to understand the source of your species' unusual resilience. These next tests will push your limits further. Jake braced himself as the alien activated a device that sent waves of energy through his body. The pain was intense, but he had experienced worse during military training. He focused on breathing steadily and keeping his mind clear. While the test continued, he noticed that one of Zethkar's machines had a loose connection that sparked occasionally. "Incredible," Zethkar whispered. "Your heart rate is actually decreasing as the pain increases. You are somehow using the stress to focus your mind rather than letting it overwhelm you." The alien made more notes and then tried a different approach. He showed Jake images designed to cause fear and monitored his brain activity. But Jake had seen real combat, and these artificial horrors meant nothing to him. Instead, he used the time to study the room's layout more carefully. He noticed that the door had no visible lock mechanism from the inside. The walls appeared to be made of some kind of smart material that could change its properties, based on commands from Zethkar's equipment. Most importantly, he realized that the platform he was lying on was connected to the room's main power system through cables running under the floor. "Your species does not respond to psychological pressure as expected," Zethkar said with frustration. In his mental voice, "Fear and pain seem to make you more focused rather than less capable. This contradicts everything we know about primitive species." Jake almost smiled at being called primitive by someone who clearly did not understand what he was dealing with. Humans had survived on a dangerous planet by learning to think clearly under pressure. They had fought wars, explored hostile environments, and overcome impossible challenges by refusing to give up when things got difficult. As the day continued, Jake gathered more information about his captor and his equipment. He learned that Zethkar had studied many other species, but none had shown human-like responses to stress. He noticed that the alien became less careful with his equipment as his excitement grew. Most importantly, he realized that Zethkar completely underestimated human intelligence and determination. When the session finally ended, Jake was returned to his holding cell exhausted but not defeated. He had learned valuable information about his captor's technology and psychology. He had also discovered that humans possessed abilities that surprised even an advanced alien scientist. As he lay in the darkness, Jake could hear faint sounds from Lisa and Tony's cells. He began tapping a simple Morse code message against the wall, hoping they would hear it and respond. Within minutes, he heard answering taps that told him his friends were also gathering information and looking for opportunities. Zethkar might think he was studying primitive creatures, but Jake knew the alien had no idea what humans were truly capable of when they worked together. 3 days had passed since the humans were captured, and Dr. Zethkar found himself completely absorbed in studying Jake Morrison. Every test revealed something unexpected about human biology and psychology. Where other species broke down under stress, this human seemed to grow stronger and more determined. Jake lay on the examination platform as Zethkar prepared another series of experiments. The alien had become obsessed with understanding what made humans different from every other species he had studied. Today's tests would push Jake's endurance to what Zethkar calculated should be the absolute limit. "Your species shows remarkable adaptation to environmental stress," Zethkar said as he adjusted his equipment. "Today I will determine if this adaptation has boundaries." Jake remained silent but alert. Over the past 3 days, he had learned to read the alien's emotional states through subtle changes in his posture and the speed of his movements. Right now, Zethkar was excited about something, which usually meant the tests would be more intense than before. The first test involved exposing Jake to extreme cold while monitoring his body's response. Most species would go into shock within minutes, but Jake's metabolism adjusted automatically to maintain his core temperature. His breathing became deeper, and his heart rate slowed to conserve energy, responses that clearly surprised the alien. Scientist. Impossible, Zethkar muttered as he checked his instruments. Your body is generating heat through muscle contractions too small to detect visually. This level of autonomous control should require conscious training. Jake did not mention that humans had indeed developed these abilities through thousands of years of surviving in harsh climates. His ancestors had lived through ice ages and desert expansions by learning to adapt quickly to changing conditions. What Zethkar saw as impossible was simply human evolution at work. During a brief rest period, Jake heard familiar tapping sounds from the ventilation system above his head. Lisa had found a way to communicate through the air ducts that connected their cells. Her message was short but encouraging. She had mapped the guard rotation schedule and found a weakness in the ship's security system. Jake tapped back with information about Zethkar-S equipment and the alien's apparent lack of understanding. About human capabilities. He also shared what he had learned about the ship's power systems by observing the connections in his examination room. The next test involved psychological pressure designed to break Jake's will to resist. Zethkar showed him images of what he claimed were his friends being tortured, followed by offers of better treatment if Jake would cooperate more fully with the experiments. But Jake had been trained to resist interrogation and recognized the manipulation attempt immediately. Instead of becoming distressed, he used the time to study Zethkar's facial expressions and body language more carefully. He was learning to read the alien's intentions before they were spoken. Your emotional responses are completely unexpected, Zethkar said with frustration. Threats to your pack members should trigger protective instincts that override rational thought. Instead, you become more calculating and observant. Jake almost laughed at the alien's misunderstanding. Humans did have strong protective instincts, but they also knew that panic and anger made poor tactical decisions. The best way to protect his friends was to stay calm, gather information, and wait for the right opportunity to act. Meanwhile, in her cell, Lisa had been observing the aliens who brought her food and water. She noticed they followed exact routines and seemed incapable of adapting when something unexpected happened. When she deliberately spilled water on the floor, the guard who came to clean, it followed a precise protocol that left the cell door unmonitored for exactly 90 seconds. Tony had made his own discoveries about alien technology. His cell was located near a maintenance junction where he could hear the ship's power systems cycling through their operations. He had identified the main energy conduits and figured out how the ship's artificial gravity worked. More importantly, he had found several design flaws that could be exploited by someone who understood human engineering principles. Back in the examination room, Zethkar prepared for his most ambitious test yet. He wanted to see how Jake's brain functioned under extreme stress by using a device that would simulate the experience of dying and being revived repeatedly. This procedure will allow me to map your neural pathways during ultimate crisis response, the alien explained. Previous subjects provided valuable data before their minds collapsed completely. Jake felt genuine fear for the first time since his capture, but he also recognized an opportunity. The device Zethkar was preparing required direct connection to the room's main power system. If Jake could cause an overload at the right moment, he might be able to disable more than just the examination equipment. As Zethkar attached the neural interface, Jake began to hyperventilate deliberately. The alien interpreted this as fear, response, and became more confident in his approach. He did not realize that Jake was preparing his body for what military training had taught him about surviving electrical shock. "Your terror response is finally showing normal patterns," Zethkar said with satisfaction. "Perhaps humans are not so different from other primitive species after all." The alien activated the device, and pain exploded through Jake's nervous system. But instead of trying to resist the energy flow, Jake used techniques he had learned for surviving lightning strikes. He guided the current through his body in ways that would cause feedback in the machine's circuits. Sparks began flying from Zethkar's equipment as the power levels fluctuated wildly. The alien frantically tried to shut down the test, but the machine was locked in an overload cycle. Jake endured the pain and kept channeling the energy back into the ship's power grid. Lights in the examination room flickered and went out. Emergency power kicked in with dim red lighting, but Jake could hear similar problems throughout the ship. His planned overload had cascaded through multiple systems. Zethkar stood in the darkness, staring at his ruined equipment and the human, who had somehow turned his own torture device against him. For the first time since beginning his research, the alien scientist felt something he had never experienced before when dealing with a primitive species. Genuine fear. Jake smiled in the red emergency lighting. "You wanted to study human responses under stress. Congratulations, you just learned that we get creative when we're angry." The alien backed away from the platform, finally beginning to understand that he had made a terrible mistake in underestimating these creatures. But his education in human capabilities was just beginning. Dr. Zethkar paced around his damaged laboratory while emergency repair crews worked to restore the power systems Jake had overloaded. The human sat calmly on the examination platform, watching the alien's agitation with quiet satisfaction. 3 days of testing had taught Zethkar that humans were unlike any species he had ever encountered, but he was not ready to admit defeat. "Your destructive behavior only confirms that humans are dangerous primitives who must be studied and contained," Zethkar said, his mental voice carrying anger for the first time. "I will discover the source of your species' resistance and find ways to break it." Jake noticed that the alien's composure was cracking. The calm clinical scientist was being replaced by someone frustrated and perhaps a little afraid. This emotional change might create opportunities that Jake could exploit. "You're studying the wrong things," Jake said aloud, knowing the alien's translation device would convert his words. "You're looking at humans like we're just another animal species, but you're missing what makes us really dangerous." Zethkar stopped pacing and fixed his large eyes on Jake. "Explain what you mean." "We're not just tough or adaptable," Jake continued. "We're vengeful. When someone hurts us or threatens our friends, we don't just fight back. We make sure it never happens again. Every test you've done has taught me more about how to hurt you." The alien's skin color shifted slightly, a sign Jake had learned. Indicated nervousness. Zethkar was beginning to realize that his experiments might have consequences he had not considered. Over the next several hours, Zethkar attempted to break Jake's will through increasingly desperate measures. He threatened to dissect Lisa and Tony while Jake watched. He used devices that caused intense pain without physical damage. He tried to force Jake to watch recordings of what he claimed were the deaths of other human prisoners, but each attempt backfired. Jake had been trained to resist interrogation and recognized every technique the alien tried. More importantly, each threat against his friends only strengthened his determination to escape and protect them. During one particularly intense session, Jake noticed something critical about Zethkar's behavior. The alien's forearms moved independently when he was calm, but when he became emotional, his movements became less coordinated. This suggested that Veltharians lost efficiency under stress, unlike humans who often performed better when angry or afraid. Your species has never been prey animals, have you? Jake asked during a brief pause in the testing. Zethkar looked confused by the question. Explain your meaning. Humans evolved on a world where everything wanted to eat us, Jake explained. We learned to think clearly when we're scared, because panic meant death. Your people never had that pressure, did they? You've always been predators. The alien did not answer, but Jake could see the truth in his reaction. Veltharians had reached the top of their food chain early in their evolution, and had never developed the survival instincts that made humans so dangerous when cornered. Meanwhile, Tony had been putting his engineering knowledge to work in his cell. The power fluctuations Jake had caused gave him opportunities to study the ship's electrical systems more closely. He discovered that Veltharian technology was incredibly advanced, but also rigidly designed. Their systems had no flexibility for dealing with unexpected problems. Lisa had made her own breakthrough by carefully observing the aliens who guarded them. She realized that they followed predetermined protocols for every situation and seemed incapable of improvising when something went wrong. Their advanced minds were actually a weakness because they could not adapt quickly to changing circumstances. The three humans had been sharing information through the ventilation system, building a complete picture of their captor's strengths and weaknesses. They were beginning to understand that Veltharians were intellectually superior, but psychologically fragile compared to humans. Zephyr's frustration reached a breaking point when Jake calmly endured a test that should have driven him insane with terror. The alien scientist had used a device that created realistic illusions of the subject's worst fears, but Jake simply closed his eyes and focused on breathing techniques he had learned in the military. What is wrong with your mind? Zethkar demanded. You should be experiencing primal terror that overrides all rational thought. I've seen real combat, Jake replied. Your fake monsters can't compare to watching friends die in actual wars. Human soldiers learn to function through fear because our survival depends on it. For the first time, Zethkar began to understand that humans were not primitive despite their lower technology level. They were a species shaped by constant struggle and violence in ways that had made them psychologically stronger than their more advanced captors. The alien made a decision that would prove to be his greatest mistake. He decided to use Jake's loyalty to his friends as a weapon against him. Zethkar activated monitors showing Lisa and Tony in their cells and threatened to begin painful experiments on them unless Jake submitted to more invasive testing. Your pack loyalty is the key to controlling your species, Zethkar announced. I will study your friend's pain responses while you watch helplessly. Jake's reaction was immediate and explosive. The calm, analytical human disappeared and was replaced by something Zethkar had never seen before, a human being fighting to protect his pack. Jake's vital signs spiked as adrenaline flooded his system. But instead of becoming irrational, he became more focused and determined than ever. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Jake said in a voice that made Zethkar step backward involuntarily. Humans have a saying, you can hurt us, but if you threaten our friends, we will burn down everything you care about to stop you. Jake began working systematically to override the restraints holding him to the examination platform. Zethkar watched in growing horror as the human used techniques the alien had never seen before. Jake was applying knowledge about Veltharian technology that he had gained from 3 days of careful observation, combined with human engineering principles that the aliens had never encountered. The restraints failed one by one as Jake exploited design flaws that no Veltharian would have noticed. Within minutes, he was free and moving toward the equipment that controlled his friend's cells. Zethkar tried to stop him, but discovered that an angry human was far more dangerous than anything his people had ever faced. Jake moved with speed and precision that seemed impossible for a species the alien had considered primitive. The laboratory filled with alarms as Jake systematically destroyed the monitoring equipment and overloaded the power systems again. This time, the cascade failure spread throughout the entire ship, disabling security protocols and unlocking containment systems. Zethkar realized too late that his experiments had given Jake everything he needed to turn the tables on his captors. The human had been studying Valtharian psychology and technology while pretending to be a helpless victim as sparks flew from damaged equipment and the lights failed throughout the ship. Jake smiled at the terrified alien scientist. "Class is over. Time for your final exam." The ship's emergency lighting cast red shadows throughout the corridors as Jake Morrison moved silently through passages that had become his hunting ground. The systematic power failures he had triggered from Zethkar's laboratory had disabled security cameras and unlocked doors throughout the vessel. What had been his prison was now his weapon. Behind him, Dr. Zethkar stumbled through the damaged laboratory, trying to understand how his carefully controlled experiment had become a nightmare. The human he had thought was helpless had demonstrated knowledge of Valtharian technology that should have been impossible for a primitive species to acquire. Jake reached the detention area where his friends were held and found them already working to escape their cells. The power disruptions had weakened the containment systems enough for Lisa and Tony to break free using techniques they had developed during their days of observation. "About time you showed up," Lisa said with a grin as she finished dismantling her cell's lock mechanism. "We heard the alarms and figured you were finally making your move." Tony emerged from his cell, carrying several pieces of equipment he had salvaged from the maintenance systems. "The power grid is completely unstable. I can probably shut down life support to specific sections if we need to clear out areas of the ship." Jake nodded and quickly shared what he had learned about Valtharian psychology and their inability to adapt under stress. "They're brilliant, but they've never had to deal with adversity like humans have. When their plans go wrong, they panic instead of adapting." The three humans moved through the ship like ghosts, using their knowledge of human military tactics against enemies who had never encountered anything like them. They avoided the main corridors where confused alien crew members were trying to restore order and instead used maintenance passages that Tony had mapped from his cell. Their first target was the ship's communication center. If they could prevent the Valtharians from calling for help, they would have more time to complete their escape plan. Lisa led the way through dark passages, using her pilot training to navigate by sound and feel when the emergency lighting failed completely. They reached the communication center to find it, guarded by two Valtharian crew members who were clearly nervous about the ship's malfunctions. The aliens carried energy weapons, but held them uncertainly, as if they had never expected to use them in actual combat. Jake signaled to his friends, and they moved with the coordination that comes from years of working together. Lisa created a distraction by triggering a minor explosion in a nearby power conduit, while Tony and Jake approached the guards from different angles. The Valtharians reacted exactly as Jake had predicted. Instead of adapting to the unexpected situation, they followed their training protocols rigidly. This made them predictable and vulnerable to humans who specialized in improvisation and flexible thinking. Within seconds, both guards were unconscious, and the humans had control of the communication center. Tony immediately began working on the alien technology while Jake and Lisa secured the area against counterattack. Their systems are incredibly advanced, but they're not designed for sabotage, Tony reported as he studied the communication equipment. Everything assumes authorized users with good intentions. There are no security measures against someone who understands the technology but wants to break it. Jake realized this was another crucial difference between human and Valtharian thinking. Humans had learned to plan for betrayal and sabotage because their history was full of conflicts and deception. The Velfarians seemed to have developed in a more cooperative society where such concerns were unnecessary. Tony's work was interrupted by alarms throughout the ship as the crew finally realized they were under attack from within. Zethkar's voice echoed through the communication system, speaking in the Velfarian language, but with obvious panic in his tone. He's telling them that the primitive subjects have escaped and are causing deliberate damage. Lisa translated, having picked up some of the alien language during her captivity. He's ordering all crew to hunt us down. Jake smiled grimly. Good. That means they're scared and trying to react with force instead of intelligence. Scared enemies make mistakes. The humans abandoned the communication center after Tony finished, destroying its key components, and moved toward their next objective, the ship's main computer core. If they could gain access to the central systems, they could potentially take control of the entire vessel. As they moved through the ship, they encountered increasing resistance from Velfarian crew members. But the aliens' attempts to stop them only demonstrated how unprepared they were for this type of conflict. Their weapons were designed for scientific work rather than combat, and their tactics assumed enemies who would follow predictable patterns. The humans, on the other hand, had been shaped by millennia of warfare and survival challenges. They moved unpredictably, used the ship's own systems against its crew, and adapted instantly to changing situations. Every encounter left more Velfarians unconscious or trapped, while the humans grew more confident and aggressive. They're learning to be afraid of us, Lisa observed after they had disabled another group of crew members without taking any serious injuries themselves. Look how they're starting to hesitate before attacking. Jake had noticed the same thing. The Velfarians were beginning to understand that humans were far more dangerous than they had believed, but this knowledge was working against them. Their fear made them less effective, while the humans became more determined with each victory. They reached the computer core to find it heavily defended by the ship's security chief and a team of armed guards. But Tony had anticipated this and had been working on a solution during their approach through the ship's maintenance systems. I've been rerouting power flows while we moved, he explained. The artificial gravity in this section is about to fail completely. The lights went out and gravity disappeared as Tony's sabotage took effect. The Velfarian guards found themselves floating helplessly in the dark while the humans used their training in zero-gravity combat to move through the confusion with deadly efficiency. Within minutes, the security team was neutralized and the humans had access to the ship's central computer. Tony began working on the alien systems while Jake and Lisa prepared for the inevitable counterattack. I'm in, Tony announced. These systems are amazing, but they have no defenses against someone who thinks like a human hacker. I can control everything from life support to navigation. Dr. Zethkar's voice came over the communication system again, but this time he was speaking directly to the humans in English. You cannot escape this vessel. Surrender now, and I will ensure you are treated with the respect due to a superior species. Jake activated the response system and spoke directly to the alien who had tortured him. Dr. Zethkar, this is Captain Jake Morrison. You wanted to study human behavior under stress. Congratulations. You're about to learn what happens when humans stop being subjects and start being predators. The ship shuddered as Tony began systematically shutting down systems throughout the vessel. The hunter had become the hunted, and the Velfarians were about to discover that underestimating humanity had been the greatest mistake of their scientific careers. Dr. Zethkar sat alone in his ruined laboratory, surrounded by the wreckage of equipment that had cost his civilization decades to develop. The ship around him groaned and shuddered as the humans systematically disabled one system after another. For the first time in his long career as a scientist, Zethkar was forced to confront the possibility that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. The lights flickered and went out completely as Tony Rodriguez finished shutting down the Ship's main power grid. Emergency systems kicked in with dim red illumination, but even those were failing as the human engineer continued his methodical destruction of Veltharian. Technology. Jake Morrison appeared in the laboratory doorway like a predator stalking wounded prey. The human who had been strapped helplessly to an examination table just hours before now moved with the confidence of someone completely in control of the situation. Behind him, Lisa Chun and Tony Rodriguez took positions that blocked any escape. "Roots, Dr. Zethkar," Jake said in a voice that carried no emotion at all. "I believe you wanted to study human responses to extreme stress. Well, here's your final data point." Zethkar's forearms trembled as he tried to reach for a weapon. That was no longer there. The humans had systematically removed every advantage the Veltharians possessed. Their technology, their weapons, their superior numbers, and their knowledge of the ship's layout. Now the alien scientist faced the consequences of his arrogance. "You cannot simply take control of this vessel," Zethkar said, though his mental voice lacked conviction. "My people will send rescue ships when we fail to report." Jake smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Tony has been very busy in your computer systems. According to your own records, this ship isn't expected to report back for another 3 months. That gives us plenty of time to learn everything we want to know about your technology and your people." The alien skin shifted to a pale blue color that Jake had learned indicated extreme fear. Zethkar was beginning to understand that his captors had become his prisoners, and that humans were far more thorough in their planning than he had ever imagined. "You studied us for days," Lisa added as she examined some of the aliens' research equipment. "Now it's our turn to learn about you. The difference is, we're not interested in causing unnecessary pain." Tony looked up from a computer console where he had been downloading the ship's entire database. "These records show that your people have captured and experimented on dozens of different species over the past century. Most of the subjects died during testing." Jake's expression hardened as he processed this information. "You're not a scientist, Dr. Zethkar. You're a mass murderer who uses scientific curiosity to justify torture." For the first time since his capture, Zethkar felt something he had never experienced when dealing with primitive species: shame. The humans were forcing him to see his actions through their eyes, and the reflection was ugly. "My research has contributed valuable knowledge about biological diversity throughout the galaxy," Zethkar protested weakly. "The advancement of science justifies temporary discomfort to lower species." "Lower species," Jake repeated. "That's your problem right there. You never bothered to find out what we were capable of because you assumed we were inferior. That assumption just cost you everything." The ship lurched as Tony activated the navigation system and began plotting a course toward human space. The Veltharian crew members who were still conscious had been locked in their quarters, unable to access any of the ship's critical systems. "Here's what's going to happen," Jake continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone issuing orders rather than making threats. "You're going to help us understand your technology. You're going to provide us with star charts showing the locations of other species in this part of the galaxy. And you're going to transmit a message to your people, warning them about what happens when they underestimate humanity." Zethkar's large eyes reflected the emergency lighting as he stared at the human who had once been his helpless test subject. "What message would you have me send?" Jake considered the question carefully. "Tell them that humans are not a species to be captured and studied. Tell them that we learn from everything that happens to us, including torture and imprisonment. Tell them that we become more dangerous when we're threatened, not less." Lisa stepped forward with a recording device she had found among Zethkar's equipment. "Also tell them that we know where to find you now. If any more human ships disappear in this part of space, we'll come looking for answers." The alien scientist looked between the 3 humans and realized that his initial assessment had been completely wrong. These were not primitive creatures driven by simple emotions and instincts. They were strategic thinkers who had turned his own arrogance against him with devastating effectiveness. "Your species is dangerous in ways I never anticipated," Zethkar admitted. "You do not simply react to threats. You learn from them and become stronger." Tony finished his work at the computer and turned to face the alien. "That's exactly right. Every species your people have studied probably fought back when they were captured. But humans do something different. We figure out how to make sure it never happens again." Jake moved closer to Zethkar, and the alien could see something in the human's eyes that made him understand why his experiments had failed. There was intelligence there, but also a cold determination that had been forged by thousands of years of survival on a hostile world. "You wanted to understand what makes humans special," Jake said. "Here's your answer. We're not just tough or adaptable. We're vindictive. When someone hurts us, we don't just fight back. We eliminate the threat permanently." The alien made his recording as instructed, warning his people that humanity was far more dangerous than their technology level suggested. He explained that humans possessed psychological advantages that made them extremely hazardous to capture or threatened out as the Valfarian ship entered human space under Tony's control. Zethkar found himself in the strange position of being grateful to his former test subjects. They had demonstrated human mercy by allowing him to live, but they had also made it clear that this mercy came with conditions. "What will happen to me now?" Zethkar asked, as Earth grew larger on the view screen. Jake looked at the alien who had tortured him and felt no hatred, only a cold satisfaction that justice was being served. "You're going to help us prepare for contact with your people and others like them. You're going to share your knowledge freely instead of stealing it from helpless prisoners." Lisa smiled as she took control of the pilot's seat. "Think of it as a new kind of experiment, Dr. Zethkar. This time, you get to learn what cooperation looks like instead of domination." As the ship approached Earth with its cargo of advanced alien technology and scientific knowledge, Zethkar began to understand the true meaning of the human saying that Jake had quoted earlier. The humans had not just escaped from captivity, they had turned the entire situation to their advantage. He had set out to study a primitive species, and had instead provided humanity with its first glimpse of the galactic community. His failed experiment would give Earth the tools and knowledge it needed to defend itself against future threats. Dr. Zethkar had indeed regretted experimenting on a human, but not for the reasons he had ever imagined possible.